Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Poe, and today I'm doing week 19 of my 2021 reads. This week I read quite a few good things I DNF'd a book, and I want to tell you at the end about FIYAHCON 2021 and the Ignite Awards, which are open to the public for voting, but only for the next few days. Content warnings and timestamps are in the description box below. The first book that I finished this week was Telling the Bees and Other Customs by Mark Norman. This is a book that I'd not just heard about, but received as a gift from my friend Andrea at Infinite Text, who I will link below, as well as her video where she reviews this book. This was such a great book, and it makes so much sense that it is such a favorite of Andrea's. It is a basically collection of lots of myths and folklore related to crafts. So things like weaving and beer making and beekeeping and milling and all sorts of things like that. It is a really just thoroughly enjoyable book, learning about all of these different beliefs and actions and just superstitions that people have related to these folklore and crafts. This was such a great book to read right before bed because each of these little tidbits of myth and folklore were just so engaging and really fun to read while also being very gentle and calming. So I think that this book is excellent to read if you like folklore and myth and you want to know more about these rural crafts. I do think that it is a little bit disjointed in terms of there's not a cohesive narrative. It's more many separate little paragraphs about different beliefs, different superstitions, but it was such a joy to read. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I definitely recommend it. Next, I finished up an audiobook that my husband Sush and I have been listening to for quite a while, which was The Feather Thief by Kirk Wallace Johnson, narrated by McLeod Andrews. So this is a book that I've heard about from I think a couple different people, but especially Olive at A Book Olive. This is one of her favorite books, and she has a video talking about non-murdery true crime. I'll link that video below. This is such a fascinating book that I can see why it's so beloved. It is really engaging, and the premise is just so wild. So this is about a guy who becomes very interested in learning about a story, a news story of somebody who stole a ton of birds and bird feathers from a natural history museum in order to sell those feathers on the black market for fly tying. And it's just such a ridiculous sounding premise, but the book itself shows that no, it's actually a very ridiculous situation. It is super engaging. The book goes into a bit of a background about the collection of bird feathers and the collection of bird specimens from different countries. A little bit of a warning, the beginning is a little gruesome when it talks about how all of those birds were collected in the Victorian era. But then it goes into just this really dark nook of the hobbyist world of bird feather collecting and fly tying, and it's just really crazy. The people who are involved are just a little bit wild and out there, and it's all a true story. So this is really very, very engaging. It is fascinating to listen to. The narrator is absolutely fantastic. I don't like generally listening to audiobooks, but this is one that I think it's actually really worth it. Just thoroughly engaged the entire time while also very infuriated at all of the people involved, really. So I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, and I definitely see why everybody loves this so much. I would definitely recommend it if you have any interest in the topic. Next, I finished a book that I read out loud to my husband Sush, which was Fugitive Telemetry by Martha Wells. This is the 6th book in the Murderbot Diaries, although it does come before the novel Network Effect. This is something that we had been looking forward to. I've read all of the previous ones out to my husband, and we just really love Murderbot. These stories are so much fun, and this one was no different. Each of the novellas, I think Martha Wells takes a slightly different genre approach to telling the story. This one was clearly a murder mystery story. Murderbot is on preservation station, and a dead body happens to appear, and it has to work with the kind of local police to solve whodunit. This was really engaging. Murderbot's humor is there at the forefront, and there's a lot of really interesting issues explored of the way that Murderbot as a security unit, which is sort of part human, part robot, is treated and viewed by the other people that it interacts with. So there's a lot of questions of kind of bigotry and things like that that are addressed that I really enjoyed. This was thoroughly enjoyable, gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I could just read so many more stories in this series. Next, I finished Lalani of the Distant Sea by Erin Andrade Kelly. This is a Filipino folklore-inspired dark fantasy middle grade that I'm pretty sure I'd heard about from Jocelyn at Yogi with a Book, who I will link below. And this book ended up being so great. I love middle grade that does interesting things with folklore and also has really interesting themes. This one for sure did. It is rather dark. Do check out the content warnings below, but it was so engaging. I absolutely loved it. And I will have a standalone review for this up later this week, so check that out. If you're at all interested in folklore or mythology or middle grade, check it out. But this story is basically about Lalani, who lives on the island of San Laguita, which is a very rough life for everybody involved. There's a lot of poverty and difficult living. Many of the men will go each year to sail across the sea to a different isle of Isa, where magic and good fortune awaits, but all of them die and don't come back. And one day things get so bad in San Laguita that Lalani decides she has to try to make the journey herself. It is filled with so many fantastical creatures and such a journey for Lalani and her friends, and I just really loved all of the atmosphere and fantasy in this story, as well as all of the themes. So definitely this is something that I loved and I recommend. I give it 5 out of 5 stars, and again, I will have a standalone review up later this week. Then I read The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk. This is a historically inspired fantasy romance with a lot of feminist themes. So this takes place in a fantasy world that seems very inspired by the late 1700s in Europe. And it takes place in the bargaining season, which is when women will go to the capital to meet husbands and get married off. And the husbands very much want women who have magical powers, except that once they get married, the women are forced to wear collars which restrict their magic, because there is a danger that if they get pregnant, demons could enter their unborn children's souls and take over. In this world, magic is something that is done through bargaining with demons. So we follow some characters who are going through this bargaining season, and there's a lot of tension between kind of fulfilling the obligations to family and fulfilling one's own professional desires and bucking against the society. There's a lot of really good things about this story. The fantasy, the magic, the system of bargaining with demons, I think is absolutely excellent. I really loved that. I loved all of the feminist themes. There really is a big discussion of how do you deal with a society that is set up so unjustly for certain members of it. So I loved all of those aspects of the story, but the story also was a lot of things that just don't work for me. It's very over the top. It's very over top in the way that it describes things. It's very over the top in the emotions and in the action. It's just one thing after another thing after another thing. It was just really a lot going on. I kind of got whiplash just trying to go from one scene to the next scene. There was no point to take a breather really in the story. So this book was maybe not so much for me, even though I can totally see that if you're somebody who likes a fast action, fast-paced plot with a lot of high emotion, all those sorts of things, I could see it working for you, even though for me, not so much. And there also were a couple of things in the way that the book wrapped up that I didn't really like, especially in terms of some relationships that I found very toxic. I didn't like the way that those ended. So overall for me, this was 3 out of 5 stars, but I do think that for a different reader, it could be absolutely excellent. So just based on your taste, pick this one up or not. And then I did DNF one book this week, which was Upright Women Wanted by Sarah Gailey. This is a dystopian sci-fi future novella that has a future where everything's gone so poorly that it's basically like the Old West again. So we follow a group of queer women who are librarians. They are traveling around distributing reading materials that are approved by the government, and sort of secretly they're queer. And we follow a young woman who kind of joins them, unbeknownst to them, in order to escape a very difficult situation at home. And this is something where I think that the Western aspects of it are really well done. You feel that kind of Western feel. I loved the atmosphere and the dialogue and that sort of stuff. But the storyline itself and the characters just weren't really working for me. So I DNF'd this at 53%. I think one of the big things that I didn't like was that the main character is somebody who very much got on my nerves. She is someone who comes from a very privileged background and is really full of herself in a lot of ways, even though she's also unsure of herself. And the story is constantly revolving around her bad decisions and her need to prove herself, and just really her inept ability to deal with everything, and everyone else kind of coming around and helping her. And it just was a very frustrating main perspective to have. I did not enjoy reading from her perspective. And the story got very gory at one point in the middle. And right after that, she makes some decisions that I think were going to turn out really poorly, and I just didn't want to see where that was going to go. So I ended up DNFing it. This is a book where I think that it's a short book, and if you like the main character, I think that this could be a fun ride for you. But since I didn't like the main character, it was just very frustrating, and I ended up DNFing it. Okay, so those are all of the books that I read and DNF'd this week. I also wanted to talk about FIYAHCON and the Ignite Awards because those are coming up. So if you're not familiar, FIYAHCON is a convention run by FIYAH Lit Magazine. They are a magazine that publishes short stories and poetry that is speculative fiction by Black authors. I really like what they're doing, and FIYAHCON is the convention that they run. They ran it for the first time last year virtually, and Sush and I attended and really loved it. So many great panels. They're doing it again virtually this year. From September 16th through 19th. The tickets, I think, are $40 US, and it is a virtual con. But there is also a side con called Bonfire, which is really specifically designed for non-US content. So it is run by people who are sort of working together with FIYAHCON, but it's free for anybody. You just have to register. It's on, I think, September 17th and 18th, and it is done mainly in non-US time zones. So even if you are not based in the US and you don't want to attend FIYAHCON itself, you should sign up for Bonfire, since that's free and in non-US time zones. So really excellent convention. They also run an awards called the Ignite Awards. So I'm going to link the shortlist for that below. Anybody in the public can go and vote in these awards. So it is open until May 21st at midnight on US time. So if you are interested, you can go and vote. It's speculative fiction. There's some really great novel and novella and middle grade and all sorts of categories that you can vote in. I definitely recommend voting if you are interested, even though the deadline is so soon. I was a little caught off guard by how soon that deadline is, and I'm trying to read a couple more things, squeeze them in before I vote, but we'll see if I get to them. Okay, so that is everything that I have for this week. If you guys have any thoughts, any comments, anything that you want to tell me about, just leave me a comment down below.